Chapter 1. The chain breaks. Basement door hadn't been opened in 3 years. Elena stood at the top of the stairs, her father's iron key cold against her palm, and wondered if grief had finally driven her mad. The house was hers now, every crumbling stone, every shadow-choked corridor, every secret her father had buried in silence. He died 2 weeks ago without explanation, without apology, leaving her alone in this decaying estate on the edge of a city that had forgotten them both. The lawyer had handed her the key yesterday. Your father left specific instructions, he'd said, his voice carefully neutral. The basement is not to be entered until after his death. He was most insistent. Elena had laughed. Then, a bitter sound that echoed in the empty parlor. Her father had been insistent about many things, keeping her isolated, keeping her afraid, keeping her ignorant of whatever darkness he'd wrapped around himself like a shroud. Now she descended. The stairs were stone, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps that weren't hers. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the smell of earth and something else, something ancient and wrong. The single candle in her hand threw wild shadows against the walls. She'd tried the electric lights first, but nothing in this house had worked properly since her father's stroke 3 months ago. Everything had been dying with him. Slowly to the bottom, she found a corridor she'd never seen. Heavy wooden doors lined the walls, all locked, all silent. But at the far end, candlelight flickered through the gap beneath a final door, and Elena's breath caught. Someone else was down here. She should have run, should have called the police, should have fled back to the fragile safety of the upper floors. But anger drove her forward, anger at her father's secrets, at the cage he'd made of her life, at the fear that had shaped every choice she'd ever made. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was circular, carved from living rock. Candles burned in iron sconces, their flames unnaturally steady in the still air. And in the center, chained to a stone column with silver links that glowed faintly in the darkness, a man. No, not a man. Elena's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. He was tall, painfully thin, his wrists and ankles bound by chains that had cut deep grooves into his pale skin. His clothes were ancient, a shirt that might have been white once, dark trousers, everything torn and stained. But his face beautiful, terrible, completely, impossibly still. His eyes opened. They were gray, the color of winter storms, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her stumble backward. He didn't move otherwise, didn't speak, just watched her with those ancient, knowing eyes, while something dark and hungry stirred in the air between them. You're real, Elena whispered. The words felt foolish the moment they left her lips. Unfortunately, his voice was rough from disuse, accent indefinable, each word carefully shaped. You must be the daughter. Elena's hand tightened on the candle. How do you know he spoke of you? When he came to feed me. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. Every 6 months, like clockwork. Blood in a cup. Conversation he didn't want. Threats if I tried to escape. He shifted slightly, and the chains sang a soft, terrible song. You have his eyes. She wanted to deny it, wanted to run, but her father's dying words circled in her memory. Burn the house. Leave the city. Never open the basement. What are you? The question came out steadier than she felt. Hungry. He leaned his head back against the stone, throat exposed, every line of his body, speaking of exhaustion held at bay by will alone. Your father knew what I was when he found me. Wounded, weak, easy to bind. His gaze returned to her. I am what your ancestors feared in the dark. What your churches named demon. What your science cannot explain. Vampire. Elena breathed. The word you choose doesn't change what I am. He studied her with those storm-colored eyes. Nor what your father was. A man who found a monster and decided to keep it. Like a curiosity. Like a weapon he might need someday. His chains rattled. He never said what he needed me for. Only that I would serve a purpose when the time came. Elena's mind raced. 3 years. Her father had kept him here for 3 years, had fed him just enough to survive, had told her nothing. She thought of all the nights her father had disappeared into the basement, all the locked doors and whispered warnings. He's dead, she said finally. My father. 2 weeks ago. Something flickered across the vampire's face, surprise perhaps, or relief. Then you came to finish what he started. To kill me. Now that I've served his mysterious purpose. Or perhaps his gaze sharpened. You don't even know what that purpose was. I don't know anything. The admission hurt. He never told me anything. Silence stretched between them. The candles burned steadily, impossibly, as though time itself had forgotten this room. Elena knew she should leave, should seal this door and burn the house, as her father had commanded. But she stood frozen, staring at this creature who should not exist, who looked at her with eyes that held centuries of loneliness. She recognized too well. "What's your name?" she asked. He blinked, clearly startled. "You want my name? You know mine apparently." A longer pause. Then, "Cashin, of House Corvus. Or I was before." He gestured vaguely at the chains. "Before this, I'm Elena." She stepped closer, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "And I think," her voice shook, "I think my father did something terrible." "Yes," Cashin agreed softly. "He did." The candles flickered once, impossibly. And Elena made a choice that would unravel everything she thought she knew about darkness, survival, and the dangerous space between living and existing. "Tell me what you need," she said. His eyes widened. "Why?" "Because whatever my father was planning, I won't be part of it." She lifted her chin. "And because no one deserves this. Not even a monster." Cashin stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was knife-sharp and sad. "You have no idea what you're offering, Elena Graves. Then teach me." Chapter 2. Blood and silver. Elena couldn't stop staring at the chains. They weren't ordinary metal even in the candlelight. She could see symbols etched into each link, spiraling patterns that hurt to look at directly. Where they touched Cashin's skin, the flesh was raw, weeping something darker than blood. "Silver," he said, following her gaze. "Blessed by something your churches consider holy. Mixed with iron from a gallows, and bound with words I don't care to repeat." His voice was matter of fact, but she heard the pain underneath. "Your father was thorough. How long can you survive like this?" Elena circled him slowly, keeping her distance. 3 years in chains. 3 years of darkness and hunger, and whatever her father had called conversation. Longer than you'd think. Less long than I'd like. Cashin watched her move with predatory awareness. "Starvation doesn't kill my kind quickly. It just makes us dangerous, unpredictable. Your father knew that. Why do you think he fed me? To keep you controllable." "Smart girl." Something flickered in his eyes, approval, maybe, or warning. "The blood kept me sane enough to be useful, weak enough to be contained. It's a delicate balance." Elena stopped in front of him. Up close, she could see the signs of his captivity more clearly: the hollow beneath his cheekbones, the unnatural pallor of his skin, the way his hands trembled almost imperceptibly. But beneath the obvious weakness, there was something else. A coiled tension. A waiting stillness that reminded her of winter ice stretched to thin. "If I free you," she said carefully, "what happens?" Cashin's laugh was dry as ancient paper. "Honest answer? I don't know. I might collapse. I might run. I might," he met her eyes directly, "lose control entirely and drain you before I remember why that would be a mistake. You're trying to frighten me. I'm trying to warn you." He leaned forward as far as the chains allowed. "I haven't fed properly in 3 years, Elena. Your father gave me just enough to survive, nothing more. Do you understand what that means? The hunger is a living thing inside me. Every heartbeat I hear, every breath, every trace of warmth, it's screaming at me to take, to feed, to survive." Elena's pulse jumped at her throat. "But you haven't. Even now, you're warning me away, for the moment." His voice dropped to something barely human. "But I've been chained here for 1,095 days. My control isn't what it was." She should have been terrified. Should have run back upstairs, locked the door, called someone, anyone. But Elena had spent her entire life afraid. Afraid of her father's silences. Afraid of the world beyond their gates. Afraid of the grief that had hollowed her out until she was barely more than a ghost herself, standing here, facing a monster who could kill her with a thought. She felt more alive than she had in years. "My father kept journals," she said suddenly. Upstairs in his study, he wrote everything down: every patient, every experiment, every. She stopped. "He was a doctor. Before, when my mother was alive." "I know." Cashin's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "He told me about her, about the cancer, about watching her die." Despite all his knowledge, all his skill, it broke something in him. Elena's throat tightened. He was looking for a cure. No, Cashin shook his head. He was looking for a way to cheat death. "There's a difference. And he thought my blood might be the key." The words hung in the cold air between them. Elena processed them slowly, each one clicking into place like tumblers in a lock she'd never known existed. He experimented on you, every 6 months. Small amounts, carefully measured. He was nothing if not methodical. Cashin's chains rattled as he shifted his weight. It never worked, of course. Vampire blood is only transformative under very specific conditions. But he kept trying, kept hoping, kept me here in the dark while he chased immortality through a microscope. Elena felt sick. I'm sorry. For what? You didn't chain me here. But I lived upstairs. I walked past this door for 3 years and never. Her voice broke. I should have known something was wrong. Your father was good at hiding things. Cashin's voice gentled unexpectedly. And you were grieving. I could hear it. Some nights. Crying in the rooms above. Walking the halls like a ghost yourself. He paused. We were both prisoners in this house, Elena. Just in different ways. The observation struck deeper than it should have. Elena blinked back sudden tears and forced herself to focus. The keys. There must be keys for these chains. Your father kept them with him always. A small silver ring, 3 keys. Cashin watched her carefully. But they'll be somewhere in this house. Men like him always have contingencies. Then I'll find them. Elena straightened her shoulders. And I'll bring you blood. Real blood. Enough to help you heal. Why? The question was sharp, almost accusatory. What do you gain from this? Elena met his storm gray eyes and told him the truth. I don't know. But my father spent the last 3 years of his life keeping you here, torturing you, using you. And the last thing he told me was to burn this house and leave. He wanted his secrets to die with him. She took a breath. I'm tired of doing what he wanted. Cashin stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, transforming his face from terrible to merely beautiful. You're either very brave or very foolish. Elena Graves, can I be both? Most people are. He settled back against the stone, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. If you're going to do this, do it quickly. The hunger is. He closed his eyes, patient, but not infinite. Elena turned toward the door, then stopped. Cashin? If I free you when I free you, I need your word you won't hurt me. His eyes opened, serious and ancient. You have it. On my house, on my name, on whatever honor I have left. He paused. But Elena, once you start this, there's no going back. Freeing me will have consequences you can't imagine. I know. She lied. She didn't, but she would learn. Chapter 3. Secrets in Blood. These studies smelled like death and old paper. Elena stood in the doorway, candle trembling in her hand, and tried not to think about how many hours her father had spent in this room. His desk sat exactly as he'd left it, journals stacked in precise towers, medical instruments laid out with surgical care, and everywhere, scattered like fallen leaves, pages covered in his cramped handwriting. She'd avoided this room since the funeral. Now she had no choice. The journals were coded naturally. Her father had trusted nothing to plain language. But Elena had watched him work for years, had learned his patterns, even as he'd kept her locked away from his true research. Numbers corresponded to dates, symbols marked subjects, and there in the earliest journal, a sketch that made her blood run cold, a man in chains, eyes closed, fangs visible. The date was 3 years and 2 months ago. Elena flipped through the pages, her father's voice echoing in her memory with every notation. Subject responds to silver binding. Healing rate decreased by 87%. Blood extraction, 30 milliliters weekly. Subject remains conscious, conversant. Claims house affiliation, investigating validity. Oh, father, she whispered. What did you become? The later journals were worse. Detailed accounts of experiments, measurements of regeneration, failed attempts to synthesize what her father called the immortality factor, and woven through it all, a desperate, manic grief that twisted every word. If I can understand how his cells regenerate, I can save her. I can bring her back. I can fix what God refused to fix. But her mother had been dead for 5 years. Whatever madness had driven her father, it had outlived its purpose by decades. Elena forced herself to keep reading. Somewhere in these pages had to be information she could use, something about vampire physiology, about what Cashin needed to survive, about what would happen when she freed him. She found it in the most recent journal, dated 2 weeks before her father's death. Subject growing unstable, hunger affecting cognition, last feeding insufficient, must increase dosage or risk complete breakdown, but supplies running low. The blood banks are asking questions. Need alternative source soon, or subject becomes liability. Her hands tightened on the journal. Her father had been running out of blood. That's why Cashin looked so starved, why his control was fracturing. Her father had been letting him die slowly. And then he died himself, leaving Elena to clean up the aftermath. She slammed the journal shut and began searching the desk in earnest. The keys had to be here somewhere, hidden among the ordered chaos of her father's final work. She pulled out drawers, checked behind books, felt along the underside of the desk for secret compartments. Nothing. Frustration building. She turned to the medical cabinet. Locked, of course. But the lock was simple, and Elena had learned years ago how to pick the basic mechanisms her father used. 30 seconds with a hairpin and the cabinet swung open. Inside, syringes, scalpels, specimen jars, and a small wooden box. Elena lifted it carefully. Heavy, something metal inside, shifting with a sound like wind chimes. She opened it. 3 silver keys on a ring, each one etched with the same spiral patterns as the chains. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd found them. She could actually do this. But first blood. The refrigerator in her father's private lab held exactly what she expected. Medical bags, carefully labeled, stacked in neat rows. Elena grabbed 3 and turned to leave, then froze. Someone was watching the house. She couldn't have said how she knew. Just a prickle at the back of her neck, a sense of attention focused on her like a spotlight in the dark. She moved to the window, careful to stay in shadow, and looked out at the overgrown gardens. Nothing, just moonlight on dead roses and crumbling statuary. But the feeling didn't fade. Elena hurried back to the basement. Blood bags clutched against her chest, keys heavy in her pocket. The stairs seemed longer in descent, the shadows deeper. When she reached the circular room, Cashin's eyes were already open, tracking her movement with unnerving precision. "You found them," he said. "Not a question. And blood. Medical grade. Is that will it work?" She held up the bags, his gaze fixed on them with an intensity that made her step back instinctively. For a moment, his face was utterly inhuman, all hunger and desperate need. Then he closed his eyes, visibly fighting for control. "Yes," he said roughly. "It will work. Not as well as fresh." But he stopped. "You should feed me before you unlock the chains. I'll need strength to break the binding properly." "Binding?" Elena moved closer. Despite her instincts. "You mean the chains are more than just metal? Everything your father did was more than it seemed." Cashin opened his eyes again, and they were clearer now, focused. "The chains are bound to this room, to the symbols carved into the floor. They're not just holding me, they're draining me, feeding on what little strength I have left." He gestured with his chin. "Look, really look at the floor." Elena knelt, holding the candle low. In its light, she could see what she'd missed before, symbols carved into the stone in a perfect circle around Cashin. They glowed very faintly, pulsing in rhythm with something she couldn't identify. "Blood magic," Cashin said quietly. "Your father's and mine, mixed and bound. It's why I couldn't break free even if the chains failed." The room itself is a cage. Elena sat back on her heels, mind racing. "Then how do I? The keys will break the physical binding. But the ritual," he hesitated. "You'll need to break that yourself. With blood. Yours specifically. A willing gift to counter an unwilling theft. You want me to bleed on the floor. I want you to understand what you're doing." His voice was urgent now. "Once you break this binding, other vampires will know. They'll feel it. House Corvus will know I'm still alive. And whoever your father was working with, because he couldn't have done this alone, they'll know you freed me." "Someone's already watching the house," Elena said quietly. "I felt it. Upstairs." Cashin's expression darkened. "Then we have less time than I thought. Feed me, Elena. Free me. And then we run." She stood, blood bags in hand, and made her choice. "Tell me what to do." Chapter 4. The break in Elena's hands shook as she opened the first blood bag. "Carefully," Cashin said, his voice strained. "Don't spill it." "I can't," he stopped, jaw clenched. "The smell alone is difficult," she understood. Even from 3 feet away, she could see the way his body responded, muscles tensing, pupils dilating, the slight parting of his lips revealing teeth that were sharper than they should be. He looked like a man dying of thirst, watching water pour into sand. "How do I?" Elena gestured helplessly at the bag, at him, at the impossible situation. "There's a cup. Behind you, on the shelf." His eyes never left the blood. "Your father used it. Silver, of course. It will burn, but I can manage." Elena found the cup tarnished, engraved with more of those spiral symbols. She poured carefully, the blood seeming to dark, too thick in the candlelight. When she turned back, Cashin had closed his eyes. "You'll have to bring it to me," he said quietly. "The chains won't let me reach." Of course they wouldn't. Elena crossed the space between them, acutely aware of how close she had to get. Close enough to feel the unnatural cold radiating from his skin. Close enough to see the pulse of inhuman need in his throat. She raised the cup to his lips. Cashin drank like a man surfacing from drowning, desperate, graceless, necessary. The silver burned where it touched his mouth, leaving raw marks. But he didn't stop. Elena watched, transfixed and horrified, as color slowly returned to his face, as the trembling in his hands eased, as something vital and terrible flowed back into him. When the cup was empty, he pulled back, breathing hard. "More," he said. "Not a demand. A plea." Elena poured the second bag. This time his control was better. He drank more slowly, more deliberately. She could see him gathering himself, piece by piece, remembering what it felt like to have strength instead of just survival. Halfway through the third bag, he stopped her. "Enough. I need to stay clear-headed for what comes next." The binding. Yes. He looked down at the symbols on the floor, then back at her. "You need to understand this will hurt. Not you necessarily, but breaking blood magic is violent. It's going to feel wrong. Everything in you will want to stop, but I can't stop." No, his eyes were grave. "Once you start, you have to finish. Otherwise, the magic will backlash. It could kill you. Kill both of us." Elena pulled the small knife from her pocket, one of her father's scalpels, sterilized and sharp. "What exactly do I do?" "Cut your palm. Not deep, you're not trying to bleed out. Just offer freely what your father took from me by force. Then walk the circle. Let 3 drops fall on each cardinal point. North, east, southwest." He paused. "When you complete the circle, put your blood-marked hand on my chest, over my heart. That's when the binding will break. And then I unlock the chains, and we leave before whoever's watching realizes what we've done." He managed a smile that was almost human. "Simple. You're a terrible liar. I know." The smile faded. "Elena, before you do this, you can still walk away. Lock the door. Leave me here. Burn the house like your father wanted. You'd be safer." "Would I?" She thought of the presence she'd felt watching, of the secrets her father had kept, of the 3 years this man, this vampire, had spent in darkness because of her family's choices. "I don't think safety is an option anymore." Cashin studied her for a long moment. "No," he agreed softly. "I suppose it isn't. You remind me of someone I knew once. Brave without knowing it. Stubborn in all the right ways. What happened to them?" "She married a monster and lived for 300 years before the sun took her." His expression was distant. "She was happy, mostly. But the cost of loving immortality when you're mortal." He shook his head. "I won't pretend there isn't one." Elena pressed the scalpel to her palm before she could lose her nerve. The pain was sharp and immediate, blood welling dark against her skin. She took a breath and began walking the circle. North. 3 drops fell like red stars onto ancient stone. The symbols flared. Suddenly visible, not glowing but somehow more real. As if they'd been sleeping and were only now waking. The air grew thick, resistant, like pushing through water. East. 3 more drops. The pressure increased. Elena's ears popped. She could feel the magic now, old and angry, recognizing the intrusion. Her father's will, locked into stone and silver, fighting against her attempt to undo it. South. The symbols were burning now, painful to look at. Cashin's chains began to rattle, vibrating with a frequency that set Elena's teeth on edge. He'd gone completely still, head bowed, every muscle locked tight. "Keep going," he ground out. "Don't stop." West. 3 final drops. The circle was complete. Elena could feel it snap into place, a pattern fulfilled. But the magic wasn't broken yet, it was just waiting, coiled and ready. She stepped toward Cashin, blood still dripping from her palm. His eyes met hers, storm gray, ancient, afraid. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "know that you gave me a choice. That matters." Elena placed her hand over his heart. The world exploded. Light blasted outward from the symbols, not illumination, but its opposite, darkness made visible, cold fire that burned without heat. The chains shattered with a sound like breaking bells, silver fragments scattering across stone. Cashin screamed, a sound that was barely human, and Elena felt the magic tear through both of them, seeking the connection her father had forged and ripping it apart. For one eternal moment, she felt everything. Cashin's hunger, his rage, his loneliness, stretching back centuries like a wound that never healed. And underneath it all, a grief that mirrored her own, the ache of watching everything you love turn to dust. Then it was over. Elena collapsed. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. She looked up into Cashin's face, no longer gaunt, no longer chained, but free and furious and focused entirely on her. "Thank you," he whispered. Then the house began to shake. Chapter 5. The hunter's Kamith shaking wasn't an earthquake. Cashin lifted Elena effortlessly, moving faster than her eyes could track. One moment she was on the floor, the next she was pressed against the far wall, his body shielding hers as the ceiling began to crack. "They felt it," he said, voice tight. "The binding breaking." Of course they felt it. Who? Elena's palm throbbed where she'd cut it, but Cashin was already tearing a strip from his shirt, wrapping her hand with surprising gentleness. "House, Theron. They must have been watching your father for months, waiting to see what happened when he died." His fingers worked quickly, efficiently. "I should have realized he couldn't have captured me alone. Someone helped him. Someone who wanted House Corvus weakened." The basement door exploded inward. 3 figures descended the stairs in fluid silence, 2 men and a woman, all inhumanly beautiful, all dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes glowed faintly amber in the candlelight, and when they smiled, Elena saw fangs. "Cashin Corvus," the woman said, her voice like honey over broken glass. "We'd heard rumors you still lived." "How unfortunate." Cashin pushed Elena further behind him. "Mira, still doing Theron's dirty work, I see. Someone has to clean up your house's mistakes." Mira's gaze shifted to Elena. "And what have we here?" "The doctor's daughter." "How convenient. Did she free you, Cashin?" "How touching." "Leave her alone. This is between our houses." "Is it?" One of the men moved left, circling with predatory grace. "Because from where I stand, she just became very interesting. The human who broke a binding none of us could touch. Who freed the last of Corvus's blood." He smiled. "Lord Theron will want to meet her. She's not part of this." Cashin's voice dropped to something that made Elena's bones vibrate. "I'm warning you, Mira. Walk away." Mira laughed. "You've been chained for 3 years, starved, broken. You drank what, 3 bags of cold blood? You can barely stand." She took a step forward. "But we'll give you a choice, for old time's sake. Come with us quietly, and we'll make the girl's death quick." "No, then we do this the hard way." They moved like lightning. Cashin met the first man with inhuman speed, catching his throat mid-lunge and slamming him into the stone column. The impact cracked rock. The second man went for Elena, but Cashin was faster. He twisted, impossibly fluid, and drove his elbow into the attacker's temple with a sound like breaking pottery. But Mira was on him then, faster than the others. And Elena saw the knife in her hand, too late to scream a warning. The blade caught Cashin's shoulder, driving deep. He hissed in pain but didn't stop moving. He spun into the attack, using Mira's momentum against her, sending her crashing into the wall. The knife clattered away. "Run," he told Elena, not looking at her. "Out the back garden, through the gate in the south wall. Don't stop." "I'm not leaving you, Elena, go." The first man was getting up, murder in his amber eyes. The second was already recovered, circling for another attack. And Mira was laughing, blood on her lips from where she'd hit the wall. "This is pointless, Cashin," she said. "Even if you kill us, Theron has 20 more waiting. You can't win this. House Corvus is dead. You're just a ghost that hasn't realized it yet." Something changed in Cashin's expression, a coldness that made the air itself seem to freeze. "House Corvus endures," he said quietly. "As long as I breathe, as long as I remember, we endure." He moved. Elena had never seen anything like it. This wasn't the weakened vampire she'd freed. This was something older, something that had survived centuries of vampire politics and wars she couldn't imagine. Cashin flowed between his attackers like water, like shadow, his hands breaking bones and tearing flesh with surgical precision. But there were 3 of them, and he was wounded. And Elena could see him slowing. She grabbed the knife Mira had dropped. "What are you doing?" Cashin's voice was sharp with alarm. "Helping." Elena's hand tightened on the blade. She had no training, no vampire speed, nothing but desperation and the memory of 3 years of watching her father control a monster with chains and blood. The second man lunged at Cashin's blind side. Elena threw herself forward and drove the knife into his back. It wasn't deep. She didn't have the strength for that. But it was silver, and the vampire screamed, his body convulsing. Cashin used the distraction, his hand closing around the man's throat, twisting with a sound that made Elena's stomach turn. The vampire crumbled to ash. Mira's eyes widened. Impossible. He was only 70 years old. He shouldn't. She looked at Cashin with new understanding. What did that bastard doctor do to you? He took more than blood, Cashin said grimly. He was breathing hard now, blood seeping from his shoulder. Run, Mira. Tell Theron I'm coming. Tell him. House Corvus remembers. For the first time, Elena saw fear in the vampire's amber eyes. Mira looked at her fallen companion's ashes, at Cashin's cold fury, at Elena standing with a bloody knife in her shaking hand. This isn't over, Mira said. She grabbed the remaining vampire's arm. But it's not ending here. They moved impossibly fast, up the stairs and gone before Elena could blink. Silence fell like a hammer. Cashin swayed, caught himself against the wall. That was stupid, he said to Elena. Brave, but stupid. You're welcome. Elena's hands wouldn't stop shaking. What did she mean? About you killing him so easily? I don't know. Cashin looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. That shouldn't have been possible. Young vampires don't ash unless they're beheaded or burned. But he trailed off. Your father's experiments. He must have changed me somehow. Changed you? How? I don't know. He pushed away from the wall, visibly forcing strength into his limbs. But we need to leave, now. More will come. And next time they won't underestimate us. Elena looked around the basement at the broken chains, the shattered ceiling, the pile of ash that had been a living thing moments ago. Where do we go? Cashin met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd found him, he smiled, really smiled, with something like hope, somewhere they won't expect. Somewhere even House Theron fears to tread. He held out his hand. Trust me. Elena took it. Yes. Chapter 6. The old Losty ran through gardens that had forgotten the sun. Cashin pulled Elena through overgrown paths, past statues covered in ivy, toward the crumbling south wall her father had never bothered to repair. The night air was cold against her face, sharp with the promise of winter, and behind them the house groaned like something dying. Here, Cashin stopped at a gap in the wall, stones long since fallen away. Beyond it lay the old city, narrow streets and abandoned buildings, the forgotten parts that progress had left behind. Stay close to me, and whatever you see, don't run. What am I going to see? Things that know what I am. He glanced at her, his shoulders still bleeding dark. Things that will wonder why you're with me. They slipped through the gap. The streets on the other side were darker than they should be, the streetlights either broken or deliberately avoided. Elena could feel eyes watching from windows, from doorways, from shadows that moved wrong. Where are we going? She whispered. Neutral ground. The catacombs. Cashin moved quickly, but no longer with the blurring speed from before. He was weakening again, the brief surge of strength fading. Every city has them places where the old laws still hold, where vampires can gather without house allegiance mattering. I don't understand. Houses, laws, neutral ground, what does any of that mean? Cashin pulled her into an alcove as footsteps echoed nearby to light to measured. They waited until the sound faded before he spoke again. You deserve answers. More than your father ever gave you. He leaned against the wall, exhaustion evident. Vampires aren't solitary creatures, Elena. We're political ones. We organize into houses, families bound by blood oaths and centuries of alliance. Each house controls territory, resources, influence in both vampire and human worlds, like crime families, more legitimate, more ancient, less forgiving. He managed a bitter smile. House Corvus was old, one of the original 7. We controlled trade routes, information networks, significant portions of the city's financial infrastructure. But 3 years ago, we were destroyed. Elena's breath caught. How? Betrayal. Alliance broken. War. Cashin's eyes went distant. House Theron wanted our territory, our influence. They'd been positioning themselves for decades, waiting for weakness. When they found it, they struck fast and hard. Killed my house, lured my father, burned our holdings, hunted down every member of Corvus blood they could find. But you survived, barely. I was wounded, poisoned with something that should have killed me. I was trying to reach our sanctum when I collapsed in the ruins of the old church. He looked at her. That's where your father found me. Unconscious, dying, easy to bind. Elena's mind raced, fitting pieces together. House Theron helped him. They must have. The binding magic, The silver chains that knowledge isn't accessible to humans. Someone taught him. Someone who wanted me alive but contained. Cashin pushed away from the wall, moving again. The question is, why? What was your father offering them in exchange for keeping me imprisoned rather than dead? His research. The words felt heavy on Elena's tongue. He was trying to understand vampire biology, to synthesize your healing abilities. If he succeeded, Theron would have a weapon. Something to give mortal soldiers vampire healing without the weaknesses. Without the need for blood, for darkness, for the old laws. Cashin's voice was grim. It would shift the balance of power completely, but he never succeeded. His journals, the experiments all failed. Did they? Cashin stopped, turning to face her. In the dim light from a distant street lamp, his eyes seemed to glow faintly. You saw what happened in the basement. That vampire shouldn't have ashed from my touch. Young ones don't die that easily. But he did. Which means your father changed me somehow. Made me into something different. Elena's cut palm throbbed. The blood magic. The binding. Maybe it wasn't just to contain you. Maybe he was testing. Yes. Cashin's jaw clenched. 3 years of experiments. Of taking my blood. Of mixing it with yours to create the binding. What if that was the point? What if he was trying to create a bridge between vampire and human biology? The implications crashed over Elena like cold water. The binding didn't just chain you to the basement. It chained you to our family, to our blood, which would explain why you could break it when no vampire could touch it. Why? Your blood completed the ritual. Cashin reached out, gently taking her bandaged hand. Elena, when you broke that binding, you didn't just free me. You might have completed your father's work. Connected us in ways neither of us understand yet. That's impossible. A week ago, you thought vampires were impossible. He released her hand carefully. But you felt it, didn't you? When the binding broke, you felt what I felt. Elena wanted to deny it. But she'd felt his hunger, his rage, his centuries of loneliness. For one brief moment, they'd been connected in a way that went beyond flesh, beyond thought. What does it mean? She asked quietly. I don't know. But House Theron will want to find out. And if word reaches the other houses, if they learn that a human broke a blood binding and survived, that she might carry some fragment of vampire essence, he stopped. You'd never be safe, ever. So what do we do? Cashin was quiet for a long moment. Then, we find out what your father really did. We learn the truth about this connection. And we make House Theron regret they ever touched House Corvus. Revenge? Survival? His eyes met hers. In the vampire world, they're usually the same thing. But Elena, once we step into the catacombs, once I present you to the neutral courts, there's no going back to your mortal life. You'll be marked as mine, as Corvus, protected by old laws, but also bound by them. And if I say no, then I'll take you somewhere safe, somewhere Theron can't reach. You'll live, you'll be alone, but you'll live. He offered his hand. The choice is yours. Elena looked at his outstretched hand, pale, blood-stained, belonging to a creature that should terrify her. Behind them lay her father's house, full of secrets and ashes. Ahead lay a world she didn't understand, full of dangers she couldn't imagine. She thought of 3 years spent as a ghost in her own life, of watching her father disappear into darkness while she waited in silence. She took Cashin's hand. Show me your world. His fingers tightened around hers. As you wish. They descended into the catacombs together. Chapter 7. Blood Oath. Entrance to the catacombs was hidden beneath a condemned church. Downstairs that spiraled into earth that had forgotten daylight, Elena counted 73 steps before they reached the bottom. The air here was different, thick with age and power, carrying scents of incense and blood and something indefinably ancient. Torches burned in iron sconces along walls carved with symbols that predated any language she recognized. Stay beside me, Cashin murmured. Speak only if directly addressed. And no matter what you see, show no fear. What will I see? Everything your nightmares forgot to imagine. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. Elena's breath caught. Vampires filled the space, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. They stood in clusters, organized by some hierarchy she couldn't decipher, dressed in everything from ancient robes to modern suits. Their conversations stopped when Cashin entered. Every eye turned toward them with predatory focus. At the far end of the chamber, on a throne carved from a single piece of obsidian, sat a figure that radiated authority like heat from a forge. Female, impossibly beautiful, with silver hair that fell to her waist, and eyes like chips of ice, Cashin Corvus. Her voice carried across the silence like a bell. We heard rumors of your resurrection. How dramatic. How inconvenient. Cashin bowed shallow, respectful but not subservient. Lady Nyx, I seek sanctuary under the old laws, do you? Nyx's gaze shifted to Elena, and it took everything Elena had not to flinch. And you bring a human into our sacred ground. How unprecedented. She freed me. She has claimed my protection. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Elena felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure. Some looked curious, others hungry. A few appeared outraged. Freed you from what exactly? Nyx leaned forward slightly. From the prison you so conveniently disappeared into 3 years ago? From the bindings that prevented House Corvus from hunting you for abandoning your duties? I was captured, Cashin said, voice tight. Tortured. Held by blood magic. I couldn't break, so you claim. Nyx's expression remained neutral. Yet here you stand, freed by a mortal girl, seeking sanctuary in neutral halls. Meanwhile, House Theron sends word that you've killed one of their youngest. Broken ancient accords, threatened the balance we've maintained for centuries. She stood. And the movement was liquid grace and coiled threat. Give me one reason I shouldn't hand you to them and be done with this nuisance. Elena spoke before she could stop herself. Because House Theron is lying, every eye in the chamber fixed on her. Cashin's hand tightened on her arm in warning, but it was too late. Nyx descended from her throne with terrible slowness. The human speaks. How bold. She stopped inches from Elena, close enough that Elena could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her skin. Do you know what we do to mortals who interrupt vampire business, child? No, Elena forced herself to meet those ice-chip eyes. But I know what I do to people who threaten me. I survive them. Silence. Then Nyx laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Oh, I like her. She circled Elena slowly. Tell me, bold child, how do you know House Theron lies? Because they helped my father imprison Cashin. They taught him the binding magic. They wanted him alive, but powerless. Elena's voice gained strength. My father kept journals, records of everything. They're still in his study. Nyx's eyes gleamed. Evidence. How delightfully tangible. She looked at Cashin. Is this true? I believe so. The binding magic was too sophisticated for a human alone. Someone helped Dr. Graves. Someone who wanted House Corvus weakened, but not destroyed. And now you're free. And Theron sends hunters into neutral ground till the chamber doors exploded inward. Mira stood in the entrance with 20 vampires behind her, all dressed in the dark crimson of House Theron. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Lady Nyx, she said, voice dripping false courtesy. Forgive the intrusion, but House Theron demands justice. Cashin Corvus murdered our blood sworn in cold violence. We claim right of sanction under the old laws. You attack neutral sanctuary, Nyx said softly, dangerously. You violate the oldest law we have. We pursue a murderer who hides behind a human shield. Mira's eyes found Elena, a human who wields blood magic she shouldn't possess, who breaks bindings no mortal should touch. She's dangerous, Lady Nyx. She should be contained, studied. Like they studied me? Cashin moved in front of Elena. Like they helped Graves study me for 3 years? We helped a grieving man find peace, Mira countered smoothly. We had no knowledge of his methods. But now we find you've corrupted a mortal girl, given her access to power beyond her understanding. Enough. Nyx's voice cut through the growing tension. The laws are clear. This sanctuary is. Mira moved, faster than Elena could track. The vampire lunged for Cashin, but he was ready, meeting her mid-leap, their collision sending shockwaves through the chamber. The Theron vampires surged forward. The neutral vampires scattered or stepped back, unwilling to break sanctuary law by interfering. Elena saw the blade in Mira's hand, too late, not silver this time, but something that gleamed like captured moonlight. It drove toward Cashin's heart with killing precision. Without thinking, Elena threw herself forward. Her hand, still bleeding beneath the bandage, caught the blade's edge. Power exploded outward. It wasn't Elena's power. It was the connection, the thing her father had forged between her blood and Cashin's, the bridge completed when she'd broken the binding. She felt it ignite like lightning in her veins, felt it pour through her palm into the blade, into Mira. The vampire screamed and flew backward, smoke rising from where the blade had touched Elena's blood. Cashin caught Elena as she collapsed. What did you do? I don't know. Elena stared at her hand. The bandage had burned away, but the cut was glowing faintly, the same cold light as the blade. I felt you were in danger and your blood is bonded to his. Nyx's voice was filled with something Elena had never expected to hear from a vampire. Wonder. That's impossible. Mira gasped from where she'd fallen. Humans can't bond. They don't have the capacity, yet here we are. Nyx knelt beside Elena, studying her with new intensity. A human girl who carries Corvus blood in her veins. Who can wound us with a touch? She looked at Cashin. What did that doctor do to you both? He made us weapons, Cashin said quietly. Against our will. Against all natural law. Nyx stood. Then we have much to discuss. But first she turned to Mira, eyes blazing. House Theron will leave my sanctuary immediately. Or I will personally demonstrate why you should fear the neutral courts. Mira's eyes promised murder. But she retreated, her vampires following. Elena watched them go, her hands still glowing faintly, and wondered what she'd become. Chapter 8. What We've Becco Melody. Nyx gave them a room deep in the catacombs, where stone remembered empires that had crumbled to dust. Rest, she'd commanded. Heal, and when you wake, we will discuss what price this bond demands. Now Elena sat on the edge of an ancient bed while Cashin paced like a caged wolf, his shoulder wound finally beginning to close. The room was lit by candles that never seemed to burn down, casting shadows that moved wrong against walls carved with histories she couldn't read. Stop pacing, she said finally. You're making me dizzy. Cashin halted, turning to face her. You could have died. When you touched that blade, when you threw yourself between us, Elena, you could have died, but I didn't. You didn't know that. His voice rose, frustration cracking through his careful control. You had no idea what would happen. He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. You can't keep doing that, risking yourself for me. Why not? You've been doing it for me since we left the basement. That's different. How? Elena stood, facing him across the small space. Because you're the vampire? Because you're supposed to be the dangerous one? She held up her hand where the cut still glowed faintly. In case you haven't noticed, I'm dangerous now too. Cashin's expression shuddered. You shouldn't be. That's the problem. He moved to the wall, pressing his forehead against cool stone. Your father made you into something unnatural. Connected you to me in ways that violate everything we know about vampire biology. And I let it happen. You were chained, starving. You had no choice. I had 3 years, Elena. 3 years of him taking my blood, mixing it with yours for the binding ritual. I felt it happening, felt something changing each time. But I was so focused on survival, on enduring, that I didn't understand what he was really doing. His hands clenched. He was making you into a bridge. Between vampire and human. Between immortal and mortal. Elena crossed to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, but didn't pull away. What does that mean? Exactly? Cashin turned to face her, and she saw fear in his ancient eyes. I don't know. No one does. This has never happened before, not in thousands of years of vampire history. But the bond is real. You felt my danger. You channeled something through your blood that wounded Mira. You're connected to me now in ways that go beyond choice, beyond consent, and you hate that. I hate that you didn't choose it. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I hate that your father used you as an experiment, that he bound you to a monster without asking, without telling you what it would cost. You're not a monster. Elena, you're not. She moved closer, close enough to feel the unnatural cold of his skin. A monster wouldn't have warned me away, wouldn't have told me the truth, even when it meant I might leave you in chains, wouldn't have protected me against 3 vampires when you could barely stand. That doesn't make me safe. Cashin's eyes searched hers. The bond pulls at me, Elena. I can feel your heartbeat like it's my own. Smell your blood like wine. And the hunger. He stopped, jaw clenching. The hunger is worse now, because part of me recognizes you as mine, as belonging to House Corvus, as something I should claim and keep, and never let go. Elena's pulse quickened. Is that what you want? To claim me? It doesn't matter what I want. But his eyes said otherwise, dark with need and fear and something that looked almost like longing. What matters is keeping you alive, finding a way to break this bond safely, returning you to your mortal life before what? Before I become like you? Elena stepped closer. Still, what if I don't want to go back? Cashin stared at her. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? She thought of her father's house, empty and cold, of the years spent as a ghost, watching life happen to other people. of the moment she'd broken Cashin's chains and felt, for the first time in forever, truly alive. I've been half dead since my mother died, going through motions, existing, but not living. And then I found you, and suddenly everything matters again, because of the bond. It's artificial, not real. Is it? Elena placed her hand over his heart, feeling the slow, strange rhythm beneath. I felt your loneliness when the binding broke. Centuries of it. I felt your grief for your house, your family. That wasn't the bond talking, that was you. Real and hurting, and trying so hard to be strong. Cashin caught her wrist gently. Elena, please, don't make this harder than it is. Why? Because you might actually feel something? She looked up at him, at the face that had watched empires rise and fall. You're terrified. Not of House Theron. Not of what my father did. But of this. She pressed her hand more firmly against his chest, of wanting something for yourself instead of just surviving. For a long moment, Cashin said nothing. Then slowly, carefully, he raised his hand to her face, fingertips ghosting along her jaw. You deserve better than a dead man walking, he whispered. Better than a vampire who's forgotten how to hope. Better than. Elena kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sent shockwaves through the bond between them. She felt his surprise, his desire, his fear, all tangled together. Felt the moment his control fractured, and he kissed her back, gentle despite the hunger she knew he carried. Careful, despite the centuries of predatory instinct. When they parted, his eyes were wide, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Elena, I'm not asking for forever, she said quietly. I'm not asking you to make me immortal, or bind me to your house, or any of that. I'm just asking you to stop pushing me away. To let me choose this. Choose you. Cashin's thumb traced her cheekbone. The bond makes it complicated. Everything about us is complicated. She managed a smile. But I'd rather face complicated with you than safe and alone. He was quiet for a long moment, some internal battle playing out behind his storm gray eyes. Then he pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. You're going to break my heart, he murmured. Maybe. Or maybe we'll both survive this. Elena wrapped her arms around him. Together, they stood like that until the candles burned lower, two broken things holding each other against the dark. Chapter 9. The war below. The alarm came at dawn, bells ringing through the catacombs in a pattern Elena had never heard but somehow understood meant danger. Cashin was moving before she fully woke, pulling her from the bed with inhuman speed. They're attacking. In force. Who? Theron. They're not waiting for the neutral courts to decide. He grabbed a blade from the wall, ancient, etched with symbols that glowed faintly. They're breaking every law we have. Which means they're desperate. Why now? Because Lady Nyx demanded your father's journals. Because she's calling a formal inquiry into House Theron's involvement. Cashin pulled Elena toward the door. They can't let that happen. Can't let anyone see the evidence. They emerged into chaos. The main chamber was a battlefield. House Theron vampires poured in through breaches in the ancient walls, their coordinated assault. Speaking of careful planning, the neutral court vampires fought back, defending their sanctuary with centuries of accumulated rage. Bodies both whole and turning to ash littered the floor. Lady Nyx stood at the center like a pillar of ice and fury, her silver hair whipping around her as she tore through Theron attackers with terrible efficiency. But even she couldn't be everywhere at once. There, Cashin pointed to a group of Theron vampires fighting their way toward a specific corridor. They're heading for the archives, where Nyx stores confiscated evidence. Elena's blood ran cold. My father's journals are there. They want them destroyed. Want any proof of their involvement erased. Cashin's grip on the blade tightened. We have to stop them. They ran through corridors that shook with violence, past fights that blurred with inhuman speed. Elena felt the bond thrumming between them, felt Cashin's battle focus, his tactical mind calculating angles and weaknesses. And underneath it, his constant awareness of her, his need to keep her safe. 3 Theron vampires blocked the archive entrance. Cashin didn't slow. He moved like water through their defense, the ancient blade singing as it found flesh. 1 vampire fell, then 2. The 3rd got past him, lunging for Elena with claws extended. Elena felt the bond ignite, felt power surge through her blood, not hers, not Cashin's, but something born from the connection between them. She raised her hand, and the vampire recoiled as if struck, smoke rising from his skin where her presence touched him. What? He gasped. Cashin's blade found his heart. Ash drifted to the floor. Your blood is bonded to mine, Cashin said grimly. Corvus blood. It recognizes Theron as enemy. He pulled Elena forward. Come on. The archives were already breached. Mira stood among shelves of ancient texts and confiscated documents, a torch in her hand. Fire licked at papers, consuming centuries of carefully preserved evidence. Stop. Cashin's voice rang with command. Mira turned, her face twisted with desperate fury. You should have stayed buried, Cashin. Should have let House Corvus die with dignity, instead of dragging it through this farce. Where are the journals? Elena demanded. Burning. As they should be. Mira gestured to the growing flames. Your father was a fool. A brilliant fool. But a fool nonetheless. He thought he could control what he'd created. Thought he could trade his research for his daughter's safety. Elena's heart stopped. What? Oh, he didn't tell you? Mira's smile was vicious. That was the deal. He'd give us his research, the secret to bonding vampire and human blood, to creating humans who could wound us, who could break our ancient power. In exchange, House Theron would leave you alone, would let you live your pathetic mortal life in peace. He was trying to protect me, Elena whispered. He was trying to save his conscience. But he failed. Mira moved closer, torch still in hand. The bond wasn't stable. Every experiment failed. Until you broke the binding, until you completed the ritual with your own willing blood. Now you're the key. The proof that it works. And House Theron will never let that knowledge exist. Cashin stepped between them. You'd destroy neutral ground, violate every law, murder your own kind, all to bury one man's research. Not just research. Revolution. Mira's eyes blazed. Don't you see? If humans can bond with vampire blood, if they can wound us, weaken us, the balance of power shifts forever. We'd be vulnerable, mortal. Everything we've built over millennia would crumble. So you'd rather start a war. I'd rather finish what we started 3 years ago. Mira dropped the torch. Flames roared higher, consuming shelves, texts, evidence. House Corvus dies. The girl dies. The research dies. And House Theron emerges as the only house strong enough to maintain order in the chaos. She moved with killing speed. Cashin met her blade to blade. Their fight a blur of inhuman grace and centuries of training. But Mira was fresh, well-fed, and Cashin was still wounded, still weak from 3 years of starvation. Elena saw him faltering. Saw the moment Mira's blade would slip past his guard and find his heart. The bond screamed in her veins. Elena didn't think. She reached for the power, the bridge her father had built, the connection completed by her willing blood. She felt Cashin's strength as if it were her own, felt his centuries of battle knowledge flowing through their shared connection, and she moved, not with vampire speed, but with something else, with the bond guiding her, showing her where Mira would strike before the vampire moved. Elena's hand caught Mira's wrist, and power exploded outward. The vampire screamed as Elena's bonded blood burned through her like acid. Not killing, not yet, but weakening, breaking the supernatural strength that made vampires apex predators. Cashin's blade found her throat. Mira crumbled to ash. Silence fell, broken only by the crackling flames. The journals, Elena gasped, suddenly exhausted. We have to hear. Lady Nyx emerged from the smoke, 3 leather-bound books in her hands. I moved them when the attack began. I've lived too long to leave evidence unguarded. Her ice-chip eyes fixed on Elena. Clever girl. Using the bond as a weapon. I didn't mean to, but you did. And every vampire in these catacombs felt it. Nyx's expression was unreadable. House Theron is broken. Their leader will answer for this violation. But you, child, you've proven that bonded humans are more dangerous than any of us imagined. Cashin moved to Elena's side, protective. What does that mean? It means the world just changed. Nyx looked at the burning archives, at the ash that had been Mira, at the two of them standing together. And you two are standing at the center of it. Elena felt Cashin's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining. Then we face it together, she said. Nyx smiled cold and approving. Indeed you will. Chapter 10. Dawn rising 3 nights after the battle. Elena stood on the balcony of House Corvus's reclaimed estate and watched the city wake to a sunrise she'd never see the same way again. The neutral courts had ruled swiftly. House Theron was dissolved, its members scattered or sworn to other houses. The journals, her father's meticulous documentation of 3 years of torture disguised as research, became evidence that changed vampire law forever. Bonded humans were now recognized, protected, feared, and Elena was the first. You should be resting. Cashin's voice came from behind her, warm despite the chill in his tone. He'd been different since the battle, more careful with her, as if she might shatter at any moment. I've been resting for 3 days. Elena turned to face him. In the pre-dawn light, he looked almost human, beautiful and terrible in hers. We need to talk. Something flickered in his storm gray eyes. About what happens next. She gestured to the estate around them, stone walls rebuilt, old sigils restored, the seat of House Corvus rising from ashes just as its last heir had. You've reclaimed your house, gathered what remains of your people. You have a future now. We have a future, do we? Elena met his gaze steadily. Because you've been avoiding this conversation since the catacombs, since you realized what the bond really means. Cashin moved to the balcony railing, gripping stone that had stood for centuries. I've been trying to find the right words, try the honest ones. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the horizon lighten. When he spoke, his voice was raw. I can offer you immortality. The turning, it's painful, dangerous, and there's no guarantee you'd survive. But if you did, you'd have centuries, power, a place in House Corvus as my equal, my partner. He paused. Or I can break the bond. Lady Nyx knows a ritual, ancient, painful for us both, but possible. You could go back to your mortal life, live normally, grow old, die peacefully. Those are my choices? Become a vampire or walk away? Yes. He still wouldn't look at her. I won't trap you in half-existence. Won't let you stay bonded, aging while I remain frozen. That's not partnership, that's cruelty drawn out over decades. Elena moved beside him, looking out at the city waking below. Somewhere down there, people were living ordinary lives, worrying about jobs and rent and what to have for breakfast. Simple concerns for simple existence. She'd never be one of them again. What if I choose neither? She said quietly. Cashin's head snapped toward her. What? You're giving me the options, immortality or freedom. But what if I want something else? Elena turned to face him fully. I don't want to be turned. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The idea of living forever, of watching everyone I might care about die. She shook her head. I'm not ready for that choice. Then the bond stays. She saw panic flash across his face and caught his hand. For now, until we understand it better. Until we know what my father really created. She squeezed his fingers. Cashin, I'm not asking you to watch me age and die. I'm asking for time, to live, to choose my own path instead of having it chosen for me by my father's experiments or your fear. It's not fear, it is. Elena moved closer. You're terrified of wanting me, of letting yourself care for something mortal and fragile. Because everyone you've ever loved has died, and you've had to endure. I understand that. But I won't let your fear make my decisions. Cashin stared at her. Centuries of loneliness warring with something that looked like hope. What are you proposing? Partnership. Real partnership. Elena gestured to the estate. You're rebuilding House Corvus. You need allies, resources, someone who understands the human world you've been isolated from. I can do that. I can be your bridge, not just in blood, but in knowledge. As my bonded human, as your equal. She met his eyes. Not property, not pet, not eventual vampire, just, Elena, working beside you, learning this world, maybe eventually, choosing immortality, or maybe choosing a mortal life, well lived, and leaving you with good memories instead of regrets. You'd risk that? Risk us growing closer knowing it might end? We're already closer. Elena placed her hand over his heart, feeling the slow rhythm beneath. The bond made sure of that. But I want to choose you, Cashin. Not because my father's magic bound us together, but because you're worth choosing. Even if it's complicated. Even if it hurts. Cashin caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his chest. You're asking me to let you stay mortal. To watch you age, even slowly. To accept that one day I'll die. Yes. Elena's voice was gentle. But isn't that better than forcing immortality on me before I'm ready? Than watching me resent the choice you made for me? He closed his eyes. You're too brave for your own good. I learned from watching someone survive 3 years in chains and still keep his humanity. She reached up, touching his face. Teach me your world, Cashin. Let me help rebuild your house. And when the time comes, if it comes, we'll make the choice about forever together. As partners, Cashin opened his eyes, and they were bright with something that might have been tears if vampires could cry. You'll regret this. Tying yourself to a dead house and a vampire who's forgotten how to be anything but alone. Then you'll have to remember. Elena smiled. I'm very persistent. Ask anyone. He laughed, surprised and genuine and beautiful. Then he pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Partnership then. For however long we have, Elena agreed. They stood like that as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Cassian flinched slightly at the light. Not burned, not yet, but uncomfortable. A reminder of the fundamental difference between them. But Elena didn't pull away. And neither did he. The other houses will watch us, Cassian said quietly. Test us. Try to break what we're building. Let them try. Elena laced her fingers through his. We survived my father. We survived Theron. We'll survive whatever comes next. Together, together. Below them, the city woke to a new day. Above them, the last stars faded into morning. And between them, the bond hummed with possibility, not the prison her father had intended, but a bridge they would cross on their own terms. The war was over. The real work was just beginning, and for the first time in 3 years, Cassian Corvus allowed himself to hope.